A strange disappearance, drug busts, and a horrifying traffic accident. As the wild frontman of ACDC, Bon Scott was the poster boy for rock and roll excess, but when the music stopped, Scott's demons often got the best of him. Born in July 1946 in Scotland, Bon Scott's family settled in Fremantle, a city near Perth, Australia, when he was just 10 years old.
He wanted to be the centre of attention a lot. He loved being the centre of attention.
Hearing that Scott was born in Scotland, kids threatened violence if he spoke with his natural Scottish accent, and then gave him the cruelly feminizing nickname of Bonnie Scotland. He loathed the name and felt demeaned by it, and into his teenage years, he'd start a fight with those who dared use it in his presence. Over time, Bonnie got shortened into Bon, and the nastiness associated with it faded away until it just became the name he used. At the age of 15, Scott decided that he'd had enough of his formal education in Melbourne, Australia. He quit school and then worked variously as a scale mechanic, farmhand, and fisherman before he got involved with illegal activities. Scott frequented rock clubs and began drinking, soon adding marijuana and amphetamines to his regimen. That all led to an entry into the world of Melbourne's criminal youth gangs, and Scott ascended the ranks to become its boss. One of Scott's cohorts was stopped by police and so brutally beaten that the future rock star exacted revenge, savagely attacking one of the policemen involved. Scott escaped punishment for that crime, but at the age of 16, he was arrested again for multiple offenses, including stealing gasoline, and this time he served time. Placed under the care of the Child Welfare Authority, Scott was sentenced to maximum security juvenile detention and was ultimately incarcerated for 9 months. The first ever rock-focused drug sting in Australian history went down at the Jan Juk Club outside Torquay in September 1969, when police arrested members of the Valentines for marijuana possession. It was a major news story at the time because the Valentines had just released the hit single Juliet and were well on their way to making a star out of one of their singers, Bon Scott. Wishing to avoid more negative attention, the Valentines urged Scott to stay quiet on the legal matter. He didn't. The singer told the Australian newspaper Go Set, "They should realize that what we do is right for us. They shouldn't persecute whole groups of people just for being different." At a court hearing over the bust, Scott and his bandmates were each fined $150. The Valentines ultimately split up in 1970. After the Valentines broke up, Scott quickly joined another band called Fraternity. In 1971, the group won Hoadley's Battle of the Sounds, a high-profile Battle of the Bands style competition in Australia. The prize included $2,000 and a trip to Los Angeles.
We really did it for you.
But the band couldn't make the trip to the United States. Scott's extensive criminal record posed problems with passports and work visas. Instead, the band decided to decamp to the friendlier UK. After spending its windfall to fly over its tour bus and other equipment, Fraternity had a hard time booking gigs in and around England. After 2 years, the band returned to Australia feeling defeated.
It wasn't a waste of time because I learned so much there, but it was bashing the head against a brick wall type thing.
Scott quit the band and got a day job hauling stuff around a manure processing plant. In early 1974, Scott was working as a truck loader in Port Adelaide, South Australia, and after leaving Fraternity, he joined a local group called the Mount Lofty Strangers. He showed up for a practice session at a hotel one night, arriving drunk and in a foul mood after having gotten into a heated argument with his wife earlier in the evening. He continued to drink and got progressively more upset, trying to pick fights with his bandmates. Despite Scott increasingly doing his best to upset everyone around him, they still urged the singer to not ride his motorcycle home, but Scott ignored them and drove away. Shortly thereafter, Scott was involved in an alcohol-related traffic accident. He sustained a concussion and damage to his neck and throat, as well as a broken nose, leg, arm, and collarbone. Scott was in a semi-comatose state for 3 days, regaining consciousness for short periods. When his condition fully stabilized, he was laid up in the hospital for a month with bones and casts and a jaw wired shut. Bon Scott grappled with substance abuse issues and alcoholism throughout the 1970s, and during his time in ACDC, his behavior grew inconsistent and unpredictable, and at one point when the band was working out of London, Scott's whereabouts were unknown for an entire week. The singer's mother wanted Scott to come visit his family in Australia, so she bought him a round-trip plane ticket. When it came time for Scott to return to London, he was nowhere to be found. ACDC guitarist Angus Young recalled in an interview with Far Out, "The guy who was doing our tour managing went to collect him, He was gonna meet him at the airport, and he got to the airport and called us up, and he said, 'No Bon.' A week later, he gets a call from the airport, and Bon said, 'I'm here, can you come pick me up?' Scott had shown up during the winter without a shirt. The rest of ACDC inquired about Scott's whereabouts, but he couldn't give an answer because he couldn't remember a single moment of the previous week. Young told Far Out, his mother had put him on the plane. She had seen him getting on the airplane. He says he thinks he followed some girl when she got off the plane in Bangkok or something.
I mean, a week could be an adventure.
By the mid-1970s, Scott was in his late 20s and fronting ACDC, whose popularity was on the rise. His drug of choice at the time was alcohol, although in 1975 he decided to try heroin. Heroin had flooded Melbourne since the Vietnam War had expanded trade and distribution for the drug, and it was easy to procure at massage parlors, one of which Scott frequented because he was friends with an employee. One night in early 1975, she and a second woman urged Scott to try heroin. He ultimately agreed and allowed them to inject it into his arm. Almost immediately, he turned pale and his breathing suffered. Recognizing the situation for what it was, a potentially fatal overdose, Scott's friends injected him with amphetamine in hopes of offsetting the opiate. But when that didn't work, they called an ambulance and delivered chest compressions until authorities arrived. Scott was instantly revived by a paramedic and then spent some time convalescing from the near-death experience in a Melbourne hospital. When the rest of ACDC learned about Scott's overdose, the musicians were so incensed that they considered firing him.
The change from fraternity to ACDC, it was just like a different person.
On February 19, 1980, Scott spent the night drinking heavily, meeting with friends at the Music Machine, a venue in the Camden neighborhood of London. After several hours and unable to drink any more booze, Scott went to sleep in a parked car owned by his associate, Alistair Kinnear. The next morning, Scott was found motionless in the car, reportedly covered in vomit. The ACDC singer had been dead for some time. He was 33 years old. 3 days later, an autopsy conducted by a London coroner determined that Scott had accidentally killed himself with alcohol. According to the book, Highway to Hell, The Life and Death of Bon Scott, the coroner wrote, "This young man of great talent was a consistent and heavy drinker who died from acute alcoholic poisoning after consuming a very large quantity of alcohol." Based on the investigation, it was determined that Scott had slept in an awkward position around the shifting stick, causing his dental plate to come loose. These factors, along with a combination of excessive alcohol consumption, hypothermia, and a weak liver, all resulted in his death.
He wanted to go home. He wanted to be with his family. Unfortunately, he went for the bottle instead.
While a coroner's office in London cited alcohol poisoning as the cause of Scott's death, it also determined that death by misadventure was to blame. That suggests that Scott could have feasibly died from an accidentally fatal combination of other substances, such as heroin. It's a concept that Scott biographer Jesse Fink pursued in the 2017 book Bon, The Last Highway. In the book, Fink suggests that the singer took a reckless attitude toward his drug use, and that by 1980, he was spending time in London with figures connected to the heroin trade. Fink wrote, "Former heroin users know what other heroin users look like, and they made it very clear to me that they had thought Bon had taken heroin that night." According to the author's research, police and coroner investigations lacked the data necessary to conclusively pinpoint alcohol as the reason for Scott's death. For example, all authorities' inquiries were finished and filed within 72 hours after discovery, which Fink says is an unusually rushed timeframe that left room for errors. Additionally, a toxicology report was never revealed to the public, if it was ever performed, and the musician's death certificate included mistakes, such as a wrong home address.
It was a terrible time for the band. They were devastated and didn't know whether to continue or not.
ACDC quickly recovered after Scott died, hiring new singer Brian Johnson and completing Back in Black in 5 months.
I remember that specifically because it was a big moment in my life.
The album became a massive hit, producing iconic songs like You Shook Me All Night Long and selling 27 million copies in the US alone, making it the third best-selling album ever. However, the rapid pace at which the band moved on after Scott's death suggests that the surviving members of ACDC had started work when Scott was still alive, a theory explored in Bon, The Last Highway. Scott didn't receive any songwriting credits on the album, but it's possible his bandmates swiped his ideas. Fink interviewed Scott's partner Holly X, a woman with chartreuse eyes who owned a horse named Double Time. You Shook Me All Night Long includes lyrics about a woman with sightless eyes who worked double time on the seduction line. Holly X claims ACDC changed Scott's original idea of chartreuse to sightless and recorded it as such. Furthermore, another former partner of Scott's named Silver Smith said she also recognized lyrics from You Shook Me All Night Long in letters the singer wrote to her in 1976. Smith also says the reason Scott drank so much the night he died was because he was celebrating finishing the lyrics to the next ACDC album, which would be Back in Black. When Bon Scott died in 1980, his professional legacy was far more robust and publicized than his private life. He was married for a few years in the 1970s to a woman named Irene Thornton, and he didn't leave any children behind. Or rather, the paternity of Scott was never officially recognized or proved. In fact, it's possible he may have fathered multiple children, though he barely, if ever, interacted with them. While recovering in the hospital from his drug overdose in 1975, Scott recalled visiting the facility once before. Early ACDC manager Michael Browning wrote in Dog Eat Dog, "Bon was bragging to me the last time he was in that hospital he was visiting two separate girls, both unknown to each other, who were both giving birth to his kids at the same time. So there's at least two of Bon Scott's children out there, or at least two I can vouch for." In 2018, Dave Stevens, a man from Melbourne raised by adoptive parents, researched his biological parents and discovered that his birth father could very likely be Scott. Stevens' biological mother confirmed that she'd become pregnant after a dalliance with the future ACDC frontman in 1967. Stevens told 9 News, "It was great to know that he was my father, but devastating to know I couldn't ever meet him.